but if Matthew Stewart, you guys ready? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming today. This is our study session on the 2017 budget. This is our last one of these that we'll have before we get to next Tuesday, when we're expected to approve the upper limits of what that budget, the 2017 budget, will be, the maximum amount of the budget. So this is the perfect day to get any and all questions answered, and we still have, another week and obviously another meeting. So this is the day that Tom will go over his recommended budget, the city manager's budget, and just want to thank city manager and the entire team and all the departments that were involved in putting together the recommended budget. I know that, speaking on behalf of the commission, I know that there was a lot of work and a lot of time that was put into this, and none of these decisions can be easy at any time, but we appreciate the hard work that's been done. So with that, I will turn it over to Tom for your recommendations at this time. Do you want to go through it and ask questions as they come up, or just wait till the end? Doesn't matter.
No, I kind of prefer the questions be posed during the presentation. I think that's fine. I won't be the only one answering questions. We have a number of staff members throughout the crowd, so I'm sure they'll be willing and able to step in as well. I think the first thing we need to do is a little bit of housekeeping. The transmittal memo needs to be updated a little bit, so if I could have everybody grab their transmittal memo that's in front of them. And I think the first update is on page 5. And at the very bottom of the page, the very far right on page 5, I think that's it, right?
It starts on page 5.
It starts on, okay, so you have it paginated a little differently. I'm looking at the employee position adjustment page, which is about, pardon that?
Page 9.
Page 9. So in terms of positions that are being reduced in workforce, the number is 9.5, not 8.5. So if you look down at the bottom of that far right line, that should be 9.5. If you turn to the next page, those are more adjustments that kind of reflect that same change. And instead of 4.5 positions that are currently unfilled that are being vacated, that number should be 5.5. And some of those are vacated prior to the beginning of 17, which the note also indicates. If you continue down that page to unfilled positions, again, that should be 5.5 instead of 4.5. The additional position that's being reduced is the administrative support 2 position in the city clerk's office. And I would also point out, because if I don't, I'm sure our fire chief will, there is an administrative 3 position there. That's not currently vacant. But what's being discussed between the city and the county is that the county will be reimbursing the city for an added billing clerk position. We do billing for the fire medic operation, and the county is responsible for all the medical operations throughout the county, including the city, and so they would be responsible for that position. In talking to Mr. Weinog, it's expected that he will be successful in getting that additional authorization from his county board, and if that's the case, the current administrative support 3 position would move over to that billing clerk position. If you continue down that same page to planning and development services reallocation of grant fund positions, you'll see a number of changes there. Actually, that is 3 positions that are being absorbed into the general fund, not 2. And a number of, I think you have the section showing the striking in that or not? They do, right? Okay. So there's no change in the total number of FTEs in that particular category, but those positions really, in our determination, aren't really legitimate charges back to the federal grant programs. And so those monies are being shifted back to the grant programs and spent through there, and these positions would then have to be general fund supported. Again, though, these are a percentage of their job. It's not even the majority reimbursement, but we wanted to point that out. And then under fire medical positions related to Eudora, Douglas County, the proposal for ambulance service intergovernmental revenue should read offset expenses. Those positions will be added, and of course, the fire department serves the entire county for medical, and so we will be reimbursed, but that shows additional positions in that. The next changes are 2 pages later, which would be what page, Casey? It's the partially unfunded, page 12. There's 2 items in that particular category. They're number items 4 and 5, and they're both fire medical. positions. Those are actually funded. We've moved those to a funded level within the operation department of the fire department. So both of those items are funded, the replaced vehicle and the station security system. So those are now funded. And then if you turn the page, that then results in a reduction in the total amount of that, of all of those items, down to $20,217.488. $20 million, excuse me, $217,448. The next, I think the final change is 3 pages later. It's under Water and Wastewater Fund, which would be what page in the pagination?
Page 16.
All right. And that is a monthly cost increase. And the very last line of water and wastewater, that's a monthly cost increase of 7.4%, which is about a $4.40 per month increase for water and wastewater charges. So those are the categories, or those are the changes in the transmittal letter. We'll now move to the actual budget document, and we'll walk through kind of a PowerPoint. The total budget this year for all funds is $189 million. This year, the general fund, which accounts for a lot of the day-to-day operations of the city, is projected at $72 million rounded, and last year it was about $69 million. Just a couple of dates to remember. Next Tuesday, July 19th, the commission will authorize the publication of the budget and set the maximum expenditure amount. On August 2nd, the public hearing on budget, the first reading is no later than 8:15, but that's expected to be the first reading on August 2nd. On August 16th, the budget and capital improvement will be adopted by the commission, second reading, and the budget ordinance. Those meetings allow for public comment about the budget. August 19th, the budget ordinance is published in the Lawrence Journal World, and then by August 25th, it is our deadline to file the budget documents with the county clerk. So this budget is guided by the goals that this city commission has adopted. There's 6 goals. They're public safety, mental health, infrastructure, non-motorized transportation/transit, affordable housing, and economic development. The recommended budget is structurally balanced, but I would suggest to you that it's by the thinnest of margins. If you look at the numbers, they're equal. Structurally balanced technically means revenues are equivalent to the expenditures, so that you have a balanced budget going forward. This budget preserves our core city services. Typically, core city services are referred to as police, fire, public works, utilities, parks and recreation, transportation, and a number of other items. However, this budget does shift some funding to the goal areas that were set by the City Commission. The budget doesn't include a recommendation for a mill levy increase. You're going to hear some public comment. I'm confident that some might suggest that we need to adjust the mill levy for certain items that are not shown as being funded. And the budget includes a 5-year capital improvements program for planning purposes. And this is I think, a new addition to your budget document this year. Previously, we would just budget for the general obligation bonded debt for the particular year that we were budgeting for. This gives you a much longer horizon to look at, and quite frankly, gives you a better context. The document, before you jump forward there, the budget has undergone a number of format changes as well, including reducing the number of transfers which complicate tracking of our budget. It includes funds in the budget that previously were not budgeted, including grant funds and some economic development funds as well as others. And it's organized more programmatically for a more realistic presentation of where you stand financially in the city. And again, it's a 5-year CIP covering all funding sources, not just the geo-bonded indebtedness fund that previously was the case in our budget document. One of the things we've emphasized this year is context. And in terms of context, the budget format and the more comprehensive capital improvements enable the commission and the community and staff to view the larger picture in the context of spending decisions and budgeting priorities. It's my impression that when you don't have context in a budget, you tend to approve and look at projects or expenditures in isolation, and they need to be looked at in the context of all things that are competing for those dollars. To properly fund the traditional core city services as well as maintain our social service funding, direct resources to the other new goal areas of the city, budget cuts in other areas were required. So as you shifted your priorities through your statement of goals, that's moved around some of the funding. Actually, the city here for years has been budgeting a structural deficit. And then they would proceed to the end of the year and they'd start to constrain or constrict the spending to make sure that they came in a balanced way. And over time, they would use some of the other available funds for transfers to cover some of those expenses in order to reduce that structural deficit. And quite frankly, that process worked. I think the problem with it is it's handled internally, it's handled administratively, and it's not very visible to do things that way. The other challenge I think we have is the general fund has basically been spending at a clip challenging our revenue projections, and especially in light of the tax lid law that will be upon us for the budget year of 18. That tax lid law will further cause a lot of stress on our budgeting process. Overall, and I don't know if this number's been updated or not. No, it hasn't. This number has actually changed. The overall budget is $189,147,606. There's $100,000 in guest tax fund that adjusted that number. The general fund, though, remains at $72 million. The budget recommends, like I said, cutting of 9.5 positions, 4 of which have incumbents in those positions. 5.5, actually maybe 5 positions have incumbents and 4.5 don't. It recommends a number of rate adjustments other than the millage rate. It includes a rate adjustment in solid waste fees and stormwater fees. And sewer and water were previously approved, I think, on a couple-year basis at least. So this budget reflects those increases. I think the budget sets the city on a more firm financial footing in preparation for the 2018 when our tax lid takes effect. If, for example, the tax lid was in effect this year, when you have 3.8% growth, just because last year, like this year, you didn't increase your millage, that doesn't mean we aren't taking in more property tax. Because even at the same millage, if the value of your assessable values increase, you're still capturing more taxable revenue, which we did. But if this year, instead of in January of 18, if in January of 17, the tax lid law had gone into effect, the tax lid based on the cost of living index would have allowed us to raise our value by about 1.6%. as opposed to 3.8%. Now, that's offset to some degree because public safety, meaning police, fire, medical, are not included under the tax lid law. And they make up, I think, about 57% of your general fund. So technically, you will be protected for public safety types of expenditures, even under the new tax lid law. So the tax lid law, if it would have allowed 1.6%, it's actually higher than that when you spread it across the entire general fund, because 57% of the general fund is public safety, and they're not subject to the 1.6. They may have been able to roll up to the, to a 3.8, depending on their growth of expenditures. And it's their growth over the prior year. Next year will certainly create even greater budget pressure than this year's property tax environment. And additional cuts probably could have and should have been made with this recommendation. In part, I say that because we're taking down our reserve for the capital, for equipment and capital needs reserves to the tune of about $500,000. So this particular budget uses reserves to pay for this equipment, and next year, you're going to be in a situation where you have to take that out of operations. You won't have that reserve. So that's why I say, we had a long and hard debate about whether or not we should, especially if the objective is to hold the millage rate flat, we had a long and hard conversation about whether or not we should make additional cuts to the tune of $500,000 to get that fund returned to its amount. I think there's a lot of risk in terms of budgeting, and in particular budgeting this far out in terms of both revenues and expenses, and I'll try and get into that a little bit for you as we go along. When you start to look at the different goals in terms of our the goals that the City Commission set, public safety was a big goal. To the extent, in terms of public safety, we spend about $51.6 million in terms of public safety. That's across all funds, not just the general fund. Some of the things that we're adding, again, consistent with the goal, we're adding a dollar amount next year for our police overhire. And Tarek's here, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think our expectation there is that covers 8 out of the, where is Tarek? 8 out of the 14 officers going into next year. Was that the cover, overcover?
Up to 8, but
yeah.
recent retirements and everything.
Right. So this number might create a little bit of room for us in the long run. But what I wanted to do in terms of total transparency, when we did the overhire this last spring, it was for 14 officers. And so as those officers that we hired in advance of expected retirements, as those retirees take place, that number comes down. And to the extent that they move out a little faster than we projected, this amount of money should kind of accrue to our fund balance over time. So that's a bit of a possibility there. The other possibility is, the economy turns sour and some officers decide they need to stay employed longer. The other thing we're doing in terms of public safety is creating a mental health squad at the dollar amount of $256,449. Across the country, police departments are moving to kind of a crisis intervention team approach, and of course that's being discussed quite heavily here in Lawrence, Douglas County. There'll be 3 officers assigned to that department, as well as a clinical caseworker at Burt Nash that will be responsible for. This budget includes 2 additional officers to fill that 3, and then the chief will transfer an existing officer to fill out the 3rd position in that. Fire medical, one of our major projects in terms of fire medical, is the rebuilding of Station 1, which coincidentally, we're talking very seriously about rebuilding the whole facility to include the senior center services in that building as well. Lisa, you had a question?
Real quick, on that mental health squad, is that in addition to the CIT that we have?
This is a special,
It's a whole
yes,
separate-
and CIT is training, and so our officers, I don't know what the percent of officers are now, but I'm pretty confident the goal is to have ultimately all of our officers trained on
Trained in
CIT.
CIT,
But what these squads typically do across the country is they kind of form the kind of the backup call for service when officers are engaged with somebody that's obviously has some challenges, and they bring in this unit as kind of a special unit to spend the amount of time necessary to deal with that situation, relieving the on-street officer to go about regular duties. You want to comment any more than that, Turner?
No, that's, in general, that's exactly what happens. And the other thing too is, this way you don't have people that need these services get passed off from one officer on one shift to another officer on one shift. So they get to know the individuals out there that need this kind of attention and help, and get them to the right resources and can kind of case manage it all the way through the system.
Okay. So continuing on under fire medical, we do have funding in there for a new burn tower, some other training facilities. We need to update our technology for our traffic signal preemption systems as our fire rigs roll through intersections that are lighted with signals. The next goal is the mental health. We spend about $1 million overall, $1,034,000 per year on mental health programs. The program that's listed here is the $325,000 for the RAP program that exists in our local schools. RAP stands for Working to Recognize Alternative Possibilities, and I believe the county is a participant in this program as well as us. I don't think the school actually participates in the funding of this program. The other thing I would mention is that this mental health response team is included in that over $1 million amount that I talked about. It kind of fits both two different goal objectives of the city commission. Under infrastructure, our infrastructure expenses are budgeted to be $60,361,000, $12 million in street maintenance and major street projects, and $29 million in utility infrastructure. And the largest project, of course, in that category is the Wakarusa wastewater treatment plant. Yes.
I still like to have some kind of brick street program, even though I know it wasn't funded, but it was just $500,000 a year, and we still have quite a few streets in town that are brick, and I think that's important. I don't think that they should be like a special street. It's just a street like any other street.
Yeah, I would say my experience with brick streets they are substantially more expensive. There's an ongoing debate about whether you get more longevity out of them, and therefore the cost over the period of time is more reasonable. But I think sometimes the objective is more about a historical designation and saving it for historical purposes. And we will take that note. I think at this stage, I'd like to, with your permission, include it in next year's budget, looking at it from that standpoint and roll it into the CIP, and maybe plug some, an annual plug dollar amount like we do for sidewalks and some other issues going forward.
Yeah, because it's not just aesthetics. It needs to be thought of as it's another street.
Yes.
Real quick, sorry. The money that we're spending on the street maintenance, is that gonna match up with what we're required to spend with the taxing that was put on this program several years ago? Are we spending that money?
I believe it is, but I will defer to Ryan on
Right,
that.
because
In the 2017 budget, there's $8 million for two major streets. Help me, Chuck. Castle and Wakarusa plant. Those two streets were specifically identified as to be completed as part of the sales tax plan when the sales tax was passed.
Then there's $800,000 from the infrastructure sales tax that's used strictly for maintenance, mill and overlay, curb repair.
because I know there was some concern expressed earlier in the year about maybe we weren't spending that tax money correctly or enough of it.
Now, I do know that there is a sales tax review committee.
Infrastructure.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think we're watching that pretty
we're
closely.
okay. I just want to make sure.
I think the concern was that failure to follow through with those projects might cause an issue because they were identified as part of that election.
Okay.
So yeah, the sales tax audit committee meets throughout the year to review the expenditures and make sure that they're in keeping with that ballot language. I think if the issue was more if we decided to do some other expenditures with that money, that wouldn't maybe be consistent with what we had told voters back in 2008.
Okay.
Moving on, under non-motorized transit, transportation transit, we have $450,000 planned for bicycle pedestrian ADA ramp improvements, $100,000 in the sidewalk gap program, and $200,000 for traffic calming projects. I can tell you that we have set up a staff team to evaluate how we do sidewalks in terms of how they're paid for, and we're looking at a lot of different opportunities in that regard. And the other thing under the multimodal, the transit center is also incorporated under this, and that potentially is a $4 million match by the city, which the city has been putting money aside so that facility should be successful in getting a grant. We have our local share available. Yes.
Last week I brought up the Greyhound, perhaps having a new shelter. Is that included in that list of amenities? Do you know yet?
I don't believe it is. I know we have been having conversations with Greyhound. They're using the facility right outside our door here.
Yeah.
And while there's, there's some expectations, I think, by the users, and then coming into our facility, which is really not set up as a traditional bus terminal.
Right.
I think we're making it work as well as we can at this point.
Yeah. That's why I think having a shelter out there, where people can stand there and wait for the bus out of the rain.
Yeah.
And I was just driving by the other day and there were people waiting to be picked up.
Right.
When you say shelter, you mean like a shelter we have at a transit stop?
Mhm.
Is that what you're?
Yeah, and so you
Just
can
to
have
cover.
packets for the routes, information for Greyhound. Then that might keep people from even having to come inside City Hall if
We'll
all the
continue the
information is there.
conversation.
Yeah, I think it'd be really helpful.
Under the next goal of affordable housing, we did plug in $300,000 for affordable housing. When you compute what we've planned just in the CIP alone over the 5-year period, that'll amount to $1,650,000. In addition, actually, for the next year, the budget for affordable housing is about $1,750,000. I know some of the advocates for affordable housing didn't feel like this was sufficient. I would hope that after they see some of the challenges that the commission is dealing with this budget, there'll be a little more understanding about the amounts that we can and can't afford.
On that 300,000,
Yes.
do we have any specific plan whatsoever for its use?
Yeah.
Or is this just a placeholder?
It's not just a placeholder. We will evolve a program, and we hope to create some competition. Our approach to this is to leverage this as much as we can in terms with other private, other government agency dollars to get the most units we can out of this. And we'll be working with some of the nonprofits in that regard to see how we best structure a program like that. But that's kind of where our thought process is going. The other thing I would say to you is we intend to go through our land inventory that the city owns, and the city owns quite a bit of property in the community, and take a look at that and see if any of that could be declared surplus for purposes of making land available for affordable housing in that regard. And the other thing, of course, that's going on in our discussion in terms of the incentive policy is that we're attempting to try and incorporate affordable housing as a part of our incentive policy when it involves housing projects. And, some people can diminish the effects or the impacts of that particular program right now, but I think we have to create some wins and build on that win to get to maybe a higher level of affordable housing as we go
So,
forward.
I know that we're going to try to leverage it with private funding as well, but we don't actually have a specific targeted program right now for that money, correct?
No. It's first off, it's first being budgeted and first being reviewed at this point. I don't think we want to spend the staff time going through a specific program until we know we have the nod from the city commission.
Tom, I would add that participation of the Affordable Housing Advisory Board in developing that program is on that board's kind of horizon for the second half. Well, I guess it's more the last quarter of the year. Once this budget gets adopted, the board will be able to weigh in on their thoughts about how to spend those dollars as well.
I can tell you have a lot of really creative people in the nonprofits that I think we can work with to really generate some good ideas on how to leverage that money. The other thing I would say is that we do have budgeted $1.45 million through CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, in the home program, which is primarily affordable housing type program. Under economic development, we budget about $1,784,000. That's somewhat level funding, I would say, at this point. There's a couple of things that we've added. $50,000 additional for the Peasley Center. One of the things that I saw when I first came to this town was the effort that this community is making towards workforce development. And this is really an outstanding approach to it. Unfortunately, it was supposed to start with some pretty sizable federal grant dollars, and that didn't occur. So we're struggling, I think, for the financing. Our recommendation is to add $50,000 for that to cover additional operational and potential expansion of some of the what they call labs. It's really training young people, any age person, in electrical and plumbing types of career opportunities. And the other thing that we've added is about $25,000 to the BTBC, and that is to help incentivize businesses, startups that are occurring through the BTBC. The request was initially $75,000. We reduced that down to $25,000. In terms of revenue, as I pointed out, our value has increased about 3.6 over 2016. And just for points of comparison, it's kind of nice to know what a mill is worth. A mill generates about $928,000, almost $29,000. This is the third consecutive year our assessed value has grown by at least 2%. And you can kind of follow the chart up there and shows what the growth is. Under the tax lid, and you can go to the next slide, it kind of blows it up a little bit. The tax lid will place significant more pressure on our ability to fund our core services, in particular in the general fund. Of course, there is the exception for public safety and for bond and indebtedness payments as well. Unfortunately, when the government, the state government, not unlike the IRS, sets up these rules, people start to figure out all the different alternative paths they have to follow to come into compliance, and also pretty much work the system a little bit, I think, in terms of where you shift your emphasis. So I imagine those things will happen, and then I imagine the reaction will be that the state will turn around and pass more legislation to curb some of that type of behavior. Yeah.
To understand it a little bit better. So if we were only able to raise it $100,000, just as a number, however, the valuation came in at $200,000, what happens to that other $100,000? Does it just go back into the valuations get dropped, or what happens to that extra money?
It just isn't used in terms of a taxable reason. It's the valuation doesn't, you can't raise the rate in terms of extracting those dollars, but the value is the value. It's just, what it is doing is curbing the amount of income that comes in. So that's reflected in the millage, and therefore the extraction isn't as large. Brian?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So again, as your example is, it goes up, the valuation goes up 100,000. But we're strict, or it goes up 200,000, but we're restricted to 100,000.
Yeah, what happens to that 100,000?
Oh, it's, as Tom says, the valuation goes up, we're just not, our mill levy will be restricted down.
So the mill levy will drop?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's exactly what would happen.
That's what I thought.
Mill levy would drop.
That's what I thought, okay.
Unless one of those exemptions allows us to.
Unless one of the exemptions there.
So the mill levy drops, that's what I was thinking. Okay.
One of the things, again, though, that I point out, it's not an insignificant in terms of the general fund, it's not an insignificant exception to that tax lid law, and that's for public safety. About 41.5 million is exempted out of the $72 million general fund, so it's not a total hit impact. I kind of refer to these provisions, and I've been in a number of different states. I call these the kind of the starve the beast approach to state government's imposition on local government's financing. And I've seen this before, and what it does is it does cap our ability to raise revenues to provide the services that our community wants. I kind of view them as an intrusion, but as subdivisions of the state, which local governments are, we're subject to that kind of discretion on their part. The other thing I would say, when you start talking a little bit about the tax lid and the potential to maybe increase your levy, I want you to keep in mind that in 2018, you also have the infrastructure sales tax is up in 2018, which is it will be a vote of the public on that. And so I think they're going to be watching how we handle all of these things in terms of whether that should be funded again or not. That's a 0.3%, Brian, a sales tax issue that has to be 0.5.
The 0.3 is the infrastructure, and then there's a 0.2 and a 0.05
Okay.
transit.
Okay, so those are all coming at the same, okay, referendum. And so you have to keep that in mind in terms of how you raise rates and millages, I believe. Moving forward, the next is the sales tax. This is a bigger and bigger impact on our general fund as well as some other funds. We've experienced about a 2% increase for 17 over 16. I think that the one comment I'd make about sales tax is usually viewed as a regressive type of tax because everybody pays their first dollar on these things, and it's probably even more aggressive in Kansas because I think you tax both food and drugs and the staples of life. The other thing about sales tax is it's a somewhat variable type of source of income, and it's not always all that dependable. Having said that, I think knowing where we're at in terms of how fast our expenditures have grown as compared to our revenue sources, I think one of the ways that, and one of the things that we have to take a hard look at is our whole economic development efforts and how we can grow both our tax base, because the growth is exempt from the tax lid as well. I think that there's opportunities now that K-10 is opened up to really take a hard look at what we're trying to develop along there and the potential to increase the pull factor from other jurisdictions. Obviously, there's others that have been pulling on Lawrence in terms of sales tax growth for some time, and so I think we have to take a hard look at our economic development efforts, and I know that's a point of concern in the community about the use of incentives and all those things, but I think we have to start to look at that in this whole context of how that is impacting our city operations as well.
I have a question about the countywide sales tax.
Yes.
I know that Brian did kind of a flow chart of where that money goes, how it comes down from the state into the county and all that. But I was wondering if there was a chart in here that showed generally how much money we think that is. And I know you're talking about it being swept into the general fund, but I wanted to know how it's actually being parsed out to the departments.
So, in 2017, we're projecting 11,049,000 coming into the general fund for our portion of this of the countywide sales tax. We're transferring of that amount. I believe it's 2,400,000 into the recreation fund. The remainder of it will stay in the general fund.
Okay,
If you recall, in the past, it would go also into the sales tax reserve fund, which funded some debt service and also park and rec, CIP and park and rec, maintenance and repairs.
right.
Those maintenance and repairs, park and rec is included in the general fund now. And the debt service that was funded out of that sales tax reserve fund are funded out of the debt service fund.
Can I see it by department then? Because it sounds like more than 2.9 is actually going to Parks and Rec, or maybe I misunderstood.
Well, it all goes into the general fund, basically. And then a portion then is allocated over to the recreation fund. That basically is the part that subsidizes, say, the aquatic center.
Sure.
Or things like that. The rest of it is distributed just like any other general fund tax amongst all departments in the general fund.
Well, let me get to my concern, is that I just want to make sure that countywide sales tax, is about the county health building and affordable housing, which they were saying was a mill tax levy decrease, and Parks and Rec. So I just want to make sure it's not being automatically put into Parks and Rec with ignoring the other two issues that were involved in that.
We'll take that question. The next thing I want to talk about is just the impact to ratepayers. This is kind of a new chart that we're showing. It'll cost $5 more per month for utility services. And what we did for purposes of ratepayers is we've included solid waste, stormwater, sewer, and water fees. And you have to use some amount, and they use an average amount of 4,000 gallons per month. So the total will go from $80.96 per month in 16 to $85.98 in 17, which is about a 6.2% increase. The bulk of that came, I think, through water and sewer, and those rates were previously set. Next is the annual household financial impact, and this too is a new chart. And what we've tried to do is kind of show the impact of all of our typical fees and taxes that would impact a home. And I think it's kind of interesting if you go across the first line and you look at city property tax, even without a millage, this shows the impact of maintaining the millage on the increased value. And so you're still seeing, a $14 increase in the amount of property tax someone would pay. The net effect, if my math is correct, is that that average value with those utility rates added to it would increase from 16 to 17 in an amount of about $74, which is about a 4.8% increase. The other thing I would say about this, and we'll get into a little bit more, is both 16 and 17 did not have property tax rate millage increases. And even though that was the case, we had entered into memos of understanding with both our police and fire agreements, and those added a pretty substantial cost into our operations. And as a result of that and not having a rate increase, that's put a lot of stress on the resources. And this year, I think it probably manifests itself more in the result of cuts having to be made in terms of those additional costs. In terms of employee adjustments that have occurred, the 4 positions with incumbents, and we could probably add the administrative support 3 fire medical position up into the 4 incumbents, include the Director of Arts and Culture in the Manager's Office, the City Auditor, the Assistant Director of Finance, the Small Business Facilitator position. Under unfilled positions, and again, I said that the support 3 position should probably be moved up to the incumbent. Under the unfilled positions, communications specialist in the Manager's Office, unfilled Park and Rec Director position, part-time waste reduction recycling specialist in the solid waste division of Public Works, and the project engineer in Public Works and the administrative support 2 position in the city clerk's office. Not only were there cuts, there's some additions. And I already reported out on the mental health squad. That's 2 additional officers that will be added to the department to make up a team of 4 people. The 3rd officer will be the transfer, and the 4th person will be the mental health professional over at the Burt Nash facility. There's 5 new utility positions, 4 obviously going to the new Wakarusa wastewater treatment plant, and then another one who will be assigned to improvements in water quality and testing. There's 2 new positions in the stormwater division, not only to perform stormwater inspections, but actually do field work in identifying and then correcting stormwater flow issues. These are funded not by property tax, these are funded by the stormwater fees. And then we talked about the planning positions and taking out the grant funds for those 3 positions and funding those out of the general fund. And then the fire medical positions that are related to the Eudora Douglas County proposal for ambulance service. But as I indicated, those positions should be pretty much entirely reimbursed through the county. So that even though they'll show up as additional numbers, the county will be providing funds for those.
Tom?
Yes.
The Emerald Ash Borer, are we using contractors or were we hiring people for that?
I believe the program you approved was to hire staff to do that.
Wouldn't
Is
it be
Mark
on that
here?
list
Mark,
then?
you want to comment?
Sure.
It should be on that list then, is
Yeah.
why I bring it up.
That was actually-
Was implemented this year.
Yeah.
So it's a continuation,
Oh, I see.
so it's not new or reduced.
So they're already been included in the document. When you
They are
approved
new.
that, you amended the budget to
2017.
include those.
Yeah.
All right, employee compensation and benefits. Obviously, as a service organization, employees are our most significant asset in terms of delivering our services. 2% merit pool is recommended. Just to give you an idea what a 2% merit pool means in terms of dollars, across all funds, that amounts to $800,000. In the general fund alone, that amounts to about $400,000. In terms of the already approved memos of understanding with our International Association of Firefighters and the Lawrence Police Association employees, Police Officer Association, those costs are $746,000 for the 2017 budget. I think fire is 4 and the police was a 3-year arrangement. And so those costs are already obligated to going forward. And so those costs are baked into our operation going forward, and we're gonna have to figure out how to make sure we can finance those. And I think those types of things, and I'm not trying to pick on those 2 groups, it's all benefit changes actually roll out to make it a challenge in terms of finding the money, which is why cuts occur.
So I was going to ask you about that. On your recommendation for the, is it called the loyalty program, the $48 down? Longevity program. On your recommendation, it says essentially to cease that program for all hires after January 1, 2017.
Yes.
How will that work contractually when, like our MOU with the police talks about it applying to all employees through 2018?
You know, I sat down with the representatives of the Firefighters Association, the representative of the police, and the representatives of the Employees Association. And I suspect that we still have some differences of view on that. But if you read the language is very clear that it says right up front that this is a discretionary program on the part of the city. And to me, I extend that logic to reducing the amount from $48 to $40, and I think discretionary means that you could limit it for people going forward. The reason that I would suggest to you that you actually establish that as a threshold or as a bar for new employees is so that employees know that coming in, so that there's no misunderstanding about what the benefit structure is. And while I understand that that the employee groups may have some consternation with that, I would hope they understand that There's some challenges that we have with this budget, and while it's a sacrifice to them, I'm asking them to participate in the cost of this impact on our city in terms of how we go forward. So I'm sure we'll have additional conversations about that with those groups as we move forward.
I might also add that the longevity program only comes into play when an employee's been here for 5 years. So, with the longevity program being phased out for new people employed beginning after January 1 of 2017, none of the employment agreements extend 5 years out. So really no one under those associations would be affected, even the new people.
Okay. I just want to report on a couple of the things that are kind of drivers in this whole budget. The next one is the employee health care increase. We got notice that increase is going to amount to 12%. In part, the employees share in that as well, but our cost for that 12% increase is $979,000. So again, that's something we have to absorb into how we fund all these things. And finally, I'd make a comment, and it doesn't show up on that list, is the city pension cost surprisingly declined substantially. CAPERS, which is the Public Employees Retirement System for Kansas public employees, dropped $552,678, $678, and that's about a 17% reduction. And the Kansas Police and Fire dropped $740,930 and 16%. As I understand it, that's after a couple of years of pretty significant roll-ups. It worries me that they would be making those kinds of adjustments. My familiarity with pension systems is that usually they run an actuarial and determine what the unfunded accrued liability is, and as a result of that, that's how much you're obligated to pay. I'm not sure exactly how they derived these numbers, and I'm concerned. Well, first off, I doubt highly that you'll see this kind of reduction again anytime soon. And the other thing that I would say to you is our liability's gone up, and usually the payments are associated with the amount of liability related to your operation. So I caution you to think that that's going to be a recurring theme coming out of our pension system. We're not fully funded by any stretch. So, and the states turned around and as I understand it, didn't fund for their obligations this year. Instead took basically what I think is a loan, because they're required to pay interest on that. So I think that's a challenge for us to keep in mind going forward. In terms of unfunded requests, you see the cuts that are being proposed, and those, of course, get a lot of attention, but what you didn't see is there are a number of partially funded, unfunded, or reduced budget requests, and that total came to about $20 million, of which about almost $15 million were in capital improvement programs this year. Actually, in the 5-year capital improvement program, there's almost $100 million worth of projects that fell down into what we call the unfunded category or list of projects. So there's no shortage of requests or statements of need for projects that this city is faced with. And so it does come back to the contextual argument of what choice are you going to make, what are you going to pick, and what aren't you going to pick. So that kind of explains the impact of all the unfunded requests. Items reduced to balance the budget. Since we last met, we did make some adjustments. And there's been a lot of coverage about this, a lot of commentary about it. The additional request in terms of reduction in an effort to balance the budget, the Art Center facility maintenance came up at the last work session, and we were asked to review the contract for the Art Center. And in looking at that contract, There's a section called interior maintenance, and it makes it pretty clear that the lessee, which in this case would be the Arts Center, we're the lessor, is obligated to take care of their interior maintenance. When the budget came in requesting $110,000. The staff recommendation was $100,000. I think kind of the indication was that this contract makes it their responsibility. I quite frankly have not done the research to find out why we picked that up all these years, but we did. And instead of just eliminating it, I reduced it 45,000, so basically I split the request in 2 years because I suspected they were used to getting that and that this should be phased out over a period of time. And that's why that recommendation came about. In terms of reinvent retirement funding for 17, we're recommending the elimination of that funding. And again, we reduced the biotech center's incentive fund request by $50,000. I would point out, that there is a lot of comment about, our commitment to arts and culture, and I understand the sensitivity of that. I would point out that we still spend about $480,000 in terms of art and cultural operations from an operational basis. Annually, the city pays $230,786 in debt service for the Arts Center building. Granted, it's a city building. Its primary purpose, though, is the Arts Center. And finally, I'd say that according to the staff, going back through 2011, the city has spent about $3.1 million on non-recurring capital expenses in the area of arts and culture.
Can I ask you about that?
Sure.
The Lawrence Arts Center does legally belong to the city of Lawrence, correct?
Yes, it does.
Is it typical for the city of Lawrence to own buildings but then not pay maintenance cost on the buildings that it owns?
I'd have to look at all the different arrangements. I think when you have a nonprofit, I don't necessarily think that's unusual. I can tell you in my past experience, we owned a facility and it was leased. And in that particular case for an art center, the art center was responsible for the maintenance costs as well.
Okay, because I was just, this weekend I was trying to think of buildings the city of Lawrence owns that we don't pay maintenance on.
We pay ours, but
Oh.
you could pay for it. But you've done capital, they put AC on there, that all predates me, but the maintenance of the building, I can't speak to how that compares at all.
Capital is our responsibility, exterior in particular, and I think maybe even HVAC. Yeah. And then utility charges as well is our responsibility.
Do we pay the library utilities?
No. It's a good one.
Part of budget responsibility. It's in the difference between what.
So moving on, social service agency funding. We do have a social service funding advisory board. They review all of these requests. It's pretty much a status quo kind of budget recommendation this year to the tune of about $1.2 million. Then in terms of outside agency and city advisory boards, we provide a lot of funding in those areas as well. The library budget was recommended at $3,763,542 for funding in 17. Brad and I have had some very good conversations about different ways to approach the difference between this amount and quite frankly what they believe they need. You have a letter, I believe, in your packet from the board chair of the library board who's requesting a millage increase that would result in $3,950,000. I think the caution that I would give to both the commission and to the library board and to the library director is that you are using, and I think that's the case potentially even with the funding request for next year, you're going to be using up all of your fund balance. And as a result of using that fund balance and then getting, if in fact, I think there's some debate as to whether they fall under the tax lid cap. But if they do, they're going to have trouble at their max reaching the amount of money they had accumulated this year. And so Brian and I went round and round about that discussion. So I think the library board and administration needs to kind of take a hard look at that. One of the things Brad and I had conversations about, and I know this is probably not something that has been a part of their past practice, but I think quite frankly, they're gonna have to look at maybe alternative sources of revenue as well. And we had a very candid conversation about whether they charge fees. One of the things I was most impressed about walking through that beautiful library was the music studio they had there. And quite frankly, I think that's a facility that legitimately could be charging a fee for its use to create some kind of revenue. We had a kind of an anecdotal conversation about the person that runs that studio complaining people skip their appointments. And of course, the point was, well, maybe if they had some money invested in the appointment, they wouldn't have been so interested in skipping. That may be a change in their culture in terms of how they approach business, but I think that those are things that, I think their board has to be comfortable with, the city has to be comfortable with. It's clear the library has tremendous support in this community. It showed up in comments that we heard when we went out in the public and had those conversations. So I understand that. That's one thing, though, that I didn't really tinker with from the standpoint of making an adjustment. And I'll tell you why, bluntly. I felt it was rather difficult for me to face our staff and face this commission when I'm making recommendations to make cuts and then turn around and say, well, I'm going to recommend that. And I told Brad that, so he understood where I was coming from. I hate to drop those things in the commission's lap, but quite frankly, ultimately the commission has the final say on those issues. So that's kind of the backdrop of the conversations I've had with them.
I'm curious, Eileen Horn has been doing the energy audits. Did she do the library?
We had a number of buildings.
Yeah.
I don't know if she, that building is a lead, potentially a lead certified building.
Sure.
That building should be the last building that needs a lead evaluation. I would guess that you took care to make sure that there was a lot of energy savings built into that structure.
Yeah, I mean, they're still working on the certification. The guys came by, but.
Any other comments regarding that? Okay. Moving on, the guest tax, the CVB, we have appropriated, recommended $990,000 for the Explore Lawrence convention, the old Convention Visitor Bureau. And it also has some other funds available for travel and tourism support in Lawrence. The transit fund, again, has a amount set aside in $4 million for the potential grant match for the new transit hub. And the funds also provide for 2 additional routes to get to the 30-minute service model for two of the bus routes in the community. Recreation funds provide funding for a variety of programming and recreation facilities, including the rec centers and the sports pavilion and our 4 aquatic facilities. We have special rec fund, which provides funding for the Lawrence Arts Center scholarships, the Lawrence Alliance, which funds Lawrence Festival of Culture, and the Lawrence Cultural Arts Commission and their activities. And of course, water and sewer, we talked about that quite a bit already. That's following a master plan that was adopted in 2013, and it talks about the rate increases there. I would just tell you that in my years of experience in walking through the utilities operation, you should be exceptionally proud of that operation. Not that you aren't of all of your departments, but they are really pushing the edge on a lot of things that they do in terms of how they operate the water and sewer utilities in this community. They're doing things that I doubt that maybe even 5% of those operations do around the country. And they're taking, I think, charge of a lot of things that will probably preserve service when other plants and operations go down. You have some technical expertise in those departments that is just beyond the edge. And despite some of the uncomfortableness of potentially cross-training, your leadership is cross-training people so that they can handle numerous plants. So, and I could say that about all the departments, but I really found some of the things that they were doing most unique and really pretty cutting edge. So if you get the chance, you should go around those plants and take a hard look, and I know a number of you have done that. In terms of other funds, I think this is a fund, parking, that's clearly more technology challenged. And we put a staff team together to start working on all of our parking issues and how they all interconnect and how they're all working together, or in some cases working apart. If you just think about neighborhood parking permits, you really need a technology solution for some of that. And the other thing you need to do, you can't do them piecemeal, you got to do them holistically, because the way parking typically moves is you push it from one location to another. So you need to kind of take a holistic approach, whether it's up in the university neighborhood or the close-in commercial neighborhoods around the downtown, or even in the downtown with our parking. So we hope to take a fairly comprehensive approach and come back with some recommendations on that. And you can see that our revenues are somewhat flat at this time, while our expenses are growing.
The revenues included in the recommended budget include the increase in fines from downtown?
Yeah.
They did already?
Yeah. As best you could project those types of things, yes. Cap, go ahead.
I forgot what I was going to ask. Do you know when that study will be done as far as the comprehensive?
No,
do you have any ballpark?
we've been kind of engrossed with budget
I'm sure.
for probably too long. So we hope to get that wrapped up and then sigh a relief and then jump into a number of different things, not the least of which is strategic planning. So we have a lot of things on our plate coming forward, but that's one that we've kind of delegated to a team of people to start pulling the different aspects of that together. I mean, it crosses a lot of different lines in the organization. So, you know, I'd like to have something to be able to roll out by the end of the year, if that's possible.
The parking fund still has some police officer salaries coming out of it.
And we didn't figure that we could just move those this year. It's in our brain. It's okay.
So when we talk about resources for that,
yep,
that's one of those things that we...
Yeah. The general fund, you know, now that it is structurally balanced, but like I said, barely, that's a really critical fund in terms of how, especially the bond rating agencies, take a look at those funds. So I think it's critical that we maintain that, and that's going to be a real challenge going forward for us. So I may leak out one at a time, Stuart, to make it work. In terms of capital improvement fund, this is a prime example of running down our reserves. And quite frankly, I wasn't being critical of Brad because I have to look at the mirror and say that we're doing the same thing. We've run down some of our reserves as well. And in that particular case, or in this particular case, so now that we're using our fund reserves, we turn around and that's going to have to be absorbed operationally. We're going to have to pay that out of the revenue stream that we have coming in terms of trying to balance in that. So that's a challenge. So I guess the point I would make is that I could have actually come back to you for a millage increase, which I pretty much promised myself, and I think most of you that I wouldn't do. or we would have had to make additional cuts. Debt service, the one thing, if you really kind of bore down and look into the details of debt service, you'll know that we are running down some of the reserves. That's somewhat by design because we have some bond issues coming off in the near future, so that should not be a challenge for us. A note about fund balances, I've kind of made this note, but Moody's, and quite frankly, Moody's is probably, in my opinion, the more conservative of the bond rating agencies. And so when you talk to Moody's, you really get a pretty thorough review of how you operate. I always say that the analysts at Moody's know more about our operation than we do. They really have some real skill sets in terms of drilling down into our operations. But when they look at our operation in terms of fund balance, about 30% of their scorecard or their evaluation has something to do with either fund balance or cash balance. And so it's tempting for governing boards to dip into those things and not structurally correct for those types of issues. And so I really caution you about that. You want to make sure those are there. Not only are they for your bond rating, but they're for unforeseen, crises that occur during the year. Even natural disasters, you may have to front some of the money before you have funds coming back from FEMA or one of the federal agencies to reimburse us for our expenses. So those are important things to have, and I'm just making a caution to you that you need to make sure that those are adequate. And I think if, for example, if you were to go for a AAA, I think the AAA scorecard now for a AAA is they want you to maintain a 30% fund balance or close to it at a minimum. So, they really stress that big time.
On page 17, where we talk about the weighting, is the last one a 5-year change in fund balance or cash balance?
You want to answer that?
Yeah, it's a 5-year change in cash balance.
Yeah.
So I've got a question about the bond rating. So if it relates to how our fund reserves stand each year, how have we maintained our bond rating, given the fact that we just heard earlier that we've been running a deficit program for a while?
Well, I think the comment was that we've budgeted for a deficit.
We budgeted, but our year end is, in most cases, at the end of the year, we scramble a little bit. We restrict expenses. We delay filling positions. We transfer funds. But I think the point I would make about all of that is, and this was driven in part, I think, by this city commission, to open up the process of how we budget. And so we've tried to include more of this kind of information in here so that the public can see those types of things. I just think I'm not comfortable with that approach. I want to have people see what these numbers are, where they're being spent, and ultimately that, you can get there okay, and I think Moody's looked at that and said that they weren't alarmed by that, but I think that they will appreciate an approach that's more transparent, and I think this is the way we're going about it.
So, given that we're making these changes to how we budget, what can we expect in the way of out-of-cycle funding requests?
I think you're still going to get those, but what I think you have to kind of train yourself to do is discern between what a true emergency is and what a non-emergency is. And I think, unfortunately, persons do not necessarily pay attention to our budget cycle. And it's most complicated, quite frankly. And so when people need money, they need money and they come to you. And I think what you're going to have to be able to do is say, you're going to have to wait to the next budget cycle. Here's how it works. Here's how you put your request in. But you really have to defer that stuff. It takes some resilience because, quite frankly, when it's isolated, it looks great. I mean, even the things that I'm suggesting, get laid on the floor. You know, I like the people that involves, I like the services they provide, but if you're gonna do those things, you know, those are hard decisions. And I think sometimes that out-of-cycle spending is what gets you in trouble. It clearly does. And it's not contextual again. You're not comparing it to everything else. So I think that's a real challenge. And that's not unique to you. That's kind of exists around the country from what I've seen. So it takes some discipline to do that.
It's hard to say no, isn't it, Tom?
It's difficult to say no.
But if you warn them up front that this is how it's gonna be, I think people
Yeah.
will less likely to do it. Sometimes in the past, my understanding is that they were told to fund a big budget.
I don't know that that's the case, Lisa,
But that's, you know, so.
yeah, I just think that you have to resist that temptation, and they have to compete with everything else that's competing for the same dollars.
Sure.
I mean, when you're told that you have $100 million, almost $100 million laying on the floor in unfunded projects for CIP, there's lots of stuff that wants to compete for that money. So, we went through a note about the fund balances. We hope to end the year 17 with a fund balance of 22%. Again, I think you should be very proud of your staff. They listened to this commission long before I got here, and they were revamping this document to try and comport with some of the concerns that the city commission had. So that the CIP in particular is a process that's just common practice and really important for a community to have. Otherwise, you find yourself getting into a position where you're moving down a line on a particular capital improvement and it's hard to reverse direction.
Tom, did you say this budget projects a 22% fund balance?
Yes, yes.
And that would be based 22% of 191 million?
It's 20% of general.
Of the
He's
general?
referring just to the general.
Just the general, so 22%
Of
of,
the expenditures
of 72 million?
So, we'll move on to conclusion, Diane. I think the 17 budget does emphasize the prioritization of the goals that the commission has set while continuing to support our core city services. We obviously can't fund all the requests that have come before this city. And at this point, I'd like to sit down and ask the commission to deliberate on these concerns. Talk about how you want to proceed. This thing is all going to move rather rapidly. I know that there's public here that probably wants to speak to some of the recommendations, and they should have that right. What they have been told publicly is that the public comment section on the next meeting, the kind of abbreviated consent plus public comment is probably the appropriate place to do that, but the chair can decide how they want to do that if there's enough time for that to happen. At the end of the day, we were kind of faced with not having enough resources to meet all the demands. So there were a number of things cut before we cut some things at the very end. And so you really have choices, but they're pretty basic. You can raise revenue or you can cut expenses, especially if you're going to get to a structurally balanced budget. And we pursued the non-increase in tax millage. At the same time, we increased the fees in a number of the other funds. And I know potentially the county may be increasing their millage. The last I heard, the school was probably protected through the state, and they probably won't have to increase their millage. But I'm not certain about that. Finally, I'd say that I probably could have done more in terms of cutting, but quite frankly, the cutting was probably painful enough for people. And at this point, I'd like to be given the year, almost year and a half. We have implemented what I refer to as a modified attrition program. And with the exception of firefighters and police officers, every position that's open comes across my desk, and I look at whether we need to fill it, whether we can consolidate it with some other part of the operation. And quite frankly, as you can now tell, it's much more difficult to reduce force with an incumbent than it is to work through attrition. It's pretty obvious that that's the case. Finally, I think that's enough for me to say at this particular time, and we'll be glad to answer any other questions, and hopefully you can engage for a while on this.
I have a couple of questions. Yeah. On page 151, it's the Parks and Rec org chart, and you were saying that we hired Emerald Ash Borers, so that should be under personal services, but on page 151 it says that they're under contractual services. So I didn't know if something needed to be fixed somewhere.
It's in the memo, yeah.
Did we do a combination of the two?
Yeah,
I don't know.
there's actually a combination of both. There's one, there's an increase for the staffing, but there were some contractual services that also went with that program.
Mhm.
If you recall, it was kind of a multi-stage thing where there's things where we had to do disposal of the wood and where that went, so that's a contractual service.
Okay, so that's not just a doubling up on
No,
accident?
no, we have the staff in there, and you'll see an increase in the staffing level in that general fund budget, and then the contractuals also went up because of that.
Mhm. I asked about the Emerald Ash Borer as well because I think that's something that we can tackle maybe in a longer timeline. You know, I know that you guys are worried about the look of our canopy in our city and all that. And I went on this long road trip to western Kansas, and when I got back to Lawrence, it's like, wow, we're like the jungle over here. It's very lush. So
Yeah.
I don't think we don't have to worry about that too much because we're pretty awesome already. So I think
Yeah.
we should broaden out that length of time in
And
dealing with
I think
it.
we can a little bit. It's hitting us pretty hard. If you actually know what you're looking for, you'll see a lot of the trees are starting to flag out where they're dying.
Right.
If you drive
I
down
have
6th
been
Street.
looking, yeah.
So that's part of our problem, but we complete our inventory, we're about 3,300 trees on right away.
Mhm.
We've removed about 200.
Mhm.
So, it's just gonna take a long time to get
Yeah.
all those out of there, so.
Yeah.
Are you treating them too?
We're treating them too, so we're trying to expand some of these, like we did out on the lawn, we treated 2 and took 2 out, so we don't wipe out all 4 at one time. But we're trying to treat ones that are in good health and that we can keep for 4 or 5 more years, just to kind of spread this out a little bit. But it's gonna go quickly, and every tree that we've cut down has borers in it, so it's not like we're getting too far ahead of ourselves.
So will we be able to spread those costs out over a long period of time?
Yeah, when we initially put it to the commission, I think we had an 8-year
About
plan. I think we might be able to
300,000 a year.
spread that out a little bit further.
Cut down the costs? per
Yeah,
year?
we'll basically condense some of the contractual costs. So where we're at now, we'll try to just keep that at the consistent level. If you recall, we're going to expand it the next year up to, 500,000 instead of the 320,000 or whatever it was. So I
Yeah.
think we can keep it fairly consistent and just
Yeah.
keep working.
Good, Mark, when you say the next year, you mean in 2018?
2018.
The ramp up was
2018,
2018.
yes.
Brian,
That'd be good.
this is probably a question for you, Brian, but it's on page 25, the general fund summary. If you could just explain to me, we moved all of the fund balances into the specific departments and things, correct? The reason that I asked that is we got our beginning fund balance of $15,683,117. Our ending fund balance is exactly the same,
Right,
That-
for
and
2017.
17. Right, okay. But is that number also included back in the various departments, the various funds?
No, the first part of this document, pages 25 through page 64
Right.
are fund specific. Each one
Right.
of these funds stands on its own.
What I'm asking is the ending fund balance that I see in each one of the funds, if I add all those together, do I come up with that number?
No, if you add all those together, oh, I don't have that. I don't have that figure, but no, it's, each fund is individually. So general fund is 15 million, airport's 40,000, capital improvements.
So that 15 million, okay,
That's
that
just the
15
general fund.
million is 22% of the 72 million there,
Correct.
correct?
Correct.
And then we have these fund balances here, correct?
Correct.
And Mike, I'm glad you said that, because as I was doing the math on this, we start talking about a 22% fund balance.
I can't,
You know, when the budget first came out, I think the projection was, 1.3 million deficit? Is that correct?
In the general fund.
In general fund. If you take a 22% fund balance and you take that to a 20% fund balance, we're still sitting at 20% on a fund balance, that generates exactly $1.4 million. And I understand the urge to push this thing to 30 and some desire to get to this AAA credit rating, but as we're talking about cutting positions within the city, that, you know, Director of Arts and Culture, we're talking about removing entirely from our city's existence a city auditor position, and we have all of that money there, and the only difference is the difference between having 22% sitting in a bank account or 20% sitting in a bank account. But that's a hard thing to sell to a community, I think.
well, I'm sitting here looking at a 22% fund balance in general fund, I understand, and then I go to the other funds and I see a fund balance on top of that, and don't I have to add those fund balances throughout to be able to come up with a percentage that's a lot larger than 22% that we're holding on to?
Well, I think it's, again, when we're speaking to Moody's, we're talking very specifically to our general operating budgets. Right. General operating budget are those budgets that do not have any restriction in that they are for the general operations of the city.
Got it.
And that's why they're looking at that. When you're looking at the other funds, they are restricted towards the specific purpose for which the fund is established. So we're not able to take, just randomly, cemetery perpetual care fund. We're not able to use those funds to fund the general operation. And so that's why when we're doing the fund accounting, it's the individual buckets that we have to keep steady. For instance, farmland remediation is on this other side of it. That's $4.5 million. That's all we have for another 20 years on that fund. And so that's why that fund balance is maintained at that level.
Well, one of the things, the city manager talks about transparency and being able to explain, that there are fund balances in the general fund. And as I look at these other funds and I see a fund balance on those, that comes out of my right pocket too, the same as the rest of the money. So I just want to make sure that it's money that it's not available. I understand it can only be used for the purposes.
Well, it's available for those purposes
Right.
that the fund was established for. Of all the funds, the property tax is in the general fund, the library fund, and the debt service fund. The sales tax funds are in the general fund and also in the capital improvement fund for a portion of the infrastructure sales tax, and then in the transportation planning, or the transportation fund. So where those taxes are going into, I think those are funds that are very pertinent to the discussion of how much fund balance we should have in those funds. The other funds are very much either like a fee-based or a grant-based or some other outside revenue source that, again, the purpose of that revenue was to expend it for this certain place. So that's where I come back and say those are very specific to those. But getting back to the Moody's, that's why they're looking very specifically at the liquidity of all of our funds, but also specifically the fund balance of the general fund.
As our finance director, are you telling me that you're very comfortable in having our fund balance at the 22% level versus being at the 20% level?
Sure. Well, again,
Or much more comfortable?
All right. Well, let me just start. I'm very comfortable in a fund balance if we have a structurally balanced revenue and expenses.
Okay.
So starting right there, if I'm at 20%, but we can look out over the next 5 years and see a structural balance that is based on a solid property tax and a solid sales tax, then that's within that 15 to 25% that Moody's is looking for a AA rated city. As sales tax becomes more if the economy changes and we're relying more on sales tax in the general fund, which we are,
Pretty apparent.
that's when you'd want to see that sales tax, or I'm sorry, that fund balance be higher than the 20, 22, 25%, all the way up if you want to go for AAA, 30 or 35. But that's all based on a structurally balanced budget. So when you speak about $1.5 million, if you're speaking about increasing the revenues $1.5 million to cover that, that's one thing. But when we're cutting $1.5 million and we're lowering that fund balance 1 year, that $1.5 million, it's gone, and it's a continual expense. So the fund balance is 20% for 17. It's 17% for 18. It's 50. It carries on, and
Right, I understand that, but we also have to be very aware that the changes we make will also have impact. And so as we talk about cutting a city auditor, for instance, if we're cutting a city auditor and calling that a net gain, the statement that you're making is that the city auditor position does not save the city the amount of money that his salary pays, right? Because if the city auditor position saves the city the amount of money or more that his salary pays, then ultimately, by removing him, you're creating a bigger problem, right?
I don't agree with that.
What part do you not agree with?
Where's the proof that he saved the?
Well, that's what I'm asking you to say. I'm not saying that he saves the city that money. What I'm saying is by removing him, the statement you're making is that he does not. Would you agree with that?
I'm saying that's highly questionable whether he pays his salary.
Okay, so okay.
And I would say further that when you do reduce your fund balance, you stand the risk of paying a higher interest rate for the bonds that you issue, for the debt that you issue.
So in the future, without a city auditor, as we look to outside auditing.
And that difference, okay, probably does save you significant. Brian presented some refinances here, and the net amount was how many million in savings? And the interest rate was lower, and as a result, they came in here and evaluated our financial situation, which included all of the fund balances across our operational funds.
And what was our fund balance rate at the time you were able to save that money?
Didn't change any, because you're not adding or
I
subtracting.
think you were 1.7.
Yeah, it was about 22%.
1.7 or 6.
Sure. The statement from Moody's was that we had a good fund balance policy between 15 and 25%, and that we were at, I think we had told them that our goal was to hit 20% this year, to be honest.
So if Moody's is doing their evaluation on a 15 to 25 scale, do you think, as we look at it just within the vacuum of Moody's perception, do you think 22 to 20 is going to make any difference to Moody's if they're looking at it from 15 to 25?
So Moody's looks at a lot of different things.
Right.
I think what they would look at is, well, I know their scorecard basically says that they'll look at what the long-term impact is of your fund balance.
Mm-hmm.
So if they would see a multiple year decrease in fund balance due to not increasing taxes or not decreasing expenditures, that would have an impact on their scorecard. I really honestly could not answer what Moody's would say at any certain point, because fund balance is 30% of it. But demographics has another large percentage of it. It's all part of a pretty complex scorecard But one of the larger items are those things that we as a management can control, and that is fund balance. And so our goal is to be able to keep as high a score as possible that management commission has the ability to change.
I think fund balance is one goal. I think the structural balance and transparency is another significant goal that our commission should embrace. It's really important that we be making the decisions on how this balances rather than staff at the end of the year.
Am I right in looking at the fund summary? I'm on page 25. If you could just double check my math here. The 2015 actual, we were at a 16.6 fund balance. Is that correct? Did I do that math correctly?
I don't have a...
Okay. So, well,
Casey's going to do that.
you know, I guess...
I'll take your word.
Well, my point here is that if you make the comment to make sure the city's moving in the right direction, I would perceive a move from 16.6 to 20, you laid a 25% improvement as certainly moving in the right direction.
I do too. I definitely see that. I also see, if you notice that 2016 estimate, we're closing out the sales tax reserve fund of $2.75 million, or $2.7 million, to increase our fund balance to get us up to that 20%. So that's part of this picture that we're looking at is in order to get there, we also did close out that sales tax reserve fund to get to the 20%.
Matt, I think the thing that you got to remember too is that the growth of expenditures is going to create a lesser percentage of fund balance. And you've entered into MOU agreements, and by extension, that puts pressure on the other employee units for them to have adjustments as well. So as that expenditure grows, that has pressure on the same amount of money that in terms of percentages, what your fund balance is as your expenses grow. And it's clear your expenses are going to continue to grow. We've already built some of those increases into the system. The other thing, in terms of the fund balance, I don't think it can be understated that if you think you can just take the $1.5 million out of the fund balance, that's not a structural fix. That's a one-year fix. Because then the following year, you've still got that additional expense unless you cut something else, and you're going to end up in a situation where you reduce your fund balance again. At the same time, your expenses are going up. And what Moody's will tell you is you're trending in the wrong direction. And that will cost you money.
Just so that I understand this other part then. Page 21, it doesn't have a page number at the bottom, but it's actually page 21. And it's the fund summary of the overview of operating and capital improvement funds. We have our estimate of revenues at $176.8 million, right? Okay, and we have expenditures of $189 million. It's page 21. What would be 21?
It's the
The
last
transmittal.
Oh,
page of the transmittal.
Yeah, of the new stuff that we have. Sorry. It's my page 21.
Your page 21. You got a special guide, did you?
No, got it? It's,
Page 20.A.
okay, 20.8, there you go. So anyway, we've got what, a $13 million shortfall if I look at this, 12.9, okay. That 12.9 difference, where does that money come from? Where are we capturing that money at?
We have several funds that have a large capital expenditures from built-up fund balance. The capital improvement reserve fund is one of them.
Right.
We have had infrastructure sales tax in that fund. We're spending $8.5 million out of that fund this year. The sales tax going into it's only $5 million. So that's of that 12.9 million, $3 million of it is we're building those roads from a built-up sales tax
Right.
reserve. 2.5 million is in the bond and interest fund. That's the, bringing our fund balance down to, or decreasing it 2.5 million, in order to accomplish the 5-year CIP.
Okay.
So that's another 2.5. Water and sewer construction, there's $1 million, again, it's money that's in the water and sewer construction fund for specific projects. There's $1 million, being spent over the transfer going in there. Solid waste construction fund has a $2.7 million, that's construction of the new solid waste construction facility. The transit fund, there's about $1 million in there for some bus purchases that had some one-time capital expenditures. I'm just going to, farming and remediation is $479,000. Special gas fund or special highway fund is $251,000. So it's a list of multiple projects that we've used, that we're cash funding some capital projects that's been built up in those other fund reserves. And again, many of these are ones that have not been in the budget process before. This is not atypical to see those type of expenditures happening in these funds. I know Brandon called me before the meeting and says, well, we need to make sure we were able to address that exact question, because this is something that this governing body's never seen before, these type of major expenditure fluctuations like this.
And that's why I bring it up, because this one page probably says more in that where we are, because you have $176 million in revenue, $189 million worth of expenditures. Where's $13 million? And, you know, that list that you have right there does that. It, you know, explains where that money comes from.
And I'll say this list is basically, it's basically each one of these pages. Each one of these pages of the fund balance shows what the revenue and expenditure is. And
Right.
I could have done the same by just flipping through the pages.
All right.
So.
All right. Okay, going back to the recommended, city manager's recommended budget as to where we are, is there any additional information that you need from Tom? Are there any other questions that you have at this time? I guess one that I would have, and Tom, I looked at most of this and I've gone over it and over and over it again, but the concern that I might have with the longevity, you know, the payments there. One has to do with if I start, you know, December of 16, you know, 20 years from now, we're going to have, you know, me again versus a guy that starts, you know, in February or January of 17, you know, and there's going to be, you know, that difference. One person's going to get, you know, whatever the longevity is at the time versus the other one that's not going to get anything. So I think that there's a deal there. One of the concerns, obviously, that I have here is I don't want to ever put the shortfalls, you know, of our budget, and that's hard to say when we're looking at eliminating positions, but on the backbones of employees. And I know that that was tough as you went through, where do I get the revenue to cover, you know, the shortfalls here. If the commission, and you know, I don't have any idea where the commission is on this, the only way to make up, you know, if the commission were decide to continue that program or continue the way it is, we have to increase taxes to do that. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think so, unless you're gonna propose some sort of additional cut.
Yeah, I mean,
As long as you want it structurally balanced, yeah, you'd have to raise revenue.
and that, I said, you know, the city manager keeps bringing up the term structurally balanced. That's where we're heading, correct?
Yes.
Is that where everybody wants to be at the end of the day?
Yes.
Okay. So if we're gonna do that, then if there's any changes to the recommended budget, you know, if we're gonna add something, we're gonna have to cut something, or we're gonna have to come up with new revenues somewhere, and that's generally gonna be by a tax increase.
Well, by slowing down the emerald ash borer, maybe we can fund the longevity program.
Mike? We just,
I gotta wonder if the longevity program is truly our biggest goal.
you know, Matt, you know, and I've asked myself that all weekend, but you know, it's one of those things that, sometimes that has been the difference, I think, in some of our employees, you know, maybe question where they are, you know, because there's times we've had to give zero out, you know, but, you know, one thing's about it, our paychecks always cash. You know, they're always good. But understand too that times are tough. I mean, that was one of the things that we were always able to do. So that's the only reason I bring it up.
Mike, I would chime in. At the same time, we are paying increases, and it seems to me that typically the purpose for longevity programs is to encourage long-term employment. I speculate, rather, because I don't know that anybody really knows the answer, but I really question whether that longevity program keeps somebody around any longer than they normally would. Typically, the way the pension systems are set up, and you know, firefighters and police officers in particular, vast majority of them stay typically with the same department unless, you know, some family move or something like that occurs. I really question how much it meets the intent of what longevity is for. Longevity is to encourage long-term employment. Now, I suppose you could say, well, we've had such good long-term employees, the thing's working. But I don't understand why the policy would have been initially drafted as being discretionary if it wasn't intended that the city commission at some point would have the ability to say, we can't afford it this year. And to me, you are very good to your employees and always have been. And I think, you know, when I talked to some of the units, I think they all recognized that it wasn't a significant amount. That doesn't mean they won't argue and disagree and bargain over it. I expect that. I mean, they're representing their self-interest. I expect people to do that. But I really question whether that really meets the intent. And so we tried to ratchet it, you know, so that it wasn't an exceptional amount. And from the employee standpoint, it doesn't sound like a lot, but from the employer standpoint, it sounds like a lot. It's $78,000, almost $80,000. And I understand, you know, that's a concern. And personally, I think that's why we kind of approached it on the other end, because we thought the cut was somewhat soft to begin with at the $8, but then going forward in the long run, the program would work itself out of the system. You know, maybe my problem is I spent too long a period of time in Michigan, and I watched what happened to a place that had to retrench. And I can tell you what happens in those environments is people come together in those crises and figure things out. They figure out how to share different responsibilities, and they step up. Nobody likes a cut. I get that. But nobody likes a tax increase either.
They do? Okay, going back to the fund summary on that, page 28 again, the contingency of $1 million. $1,065,000. Now I know that that's less than what it was in the 16 adopted by far, which was 13 million.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, and the 28. That is made up of several different funds. One of them would be like the the recreation program. That's, I think that one's 244,000. That's set up for a new program coming online that maybe the revenue hasn't been set up yet. The general, I don't believe we have any in the general fund.
413.
Oh, we do have 413,000. That's a department, and can you recall what department that one was? I don't have that real handy on what that 413 is. It's one of our
Because we
departments.
haven't had one for quite a while, it looks like, a contingency fund.
Yeah, actually,
Brian, I believe that's the merit pool.
I'm sorry.
That's what that is.
That's the merit pool.
The merit.
The 413.
413, thank you, thank you.
Is the merit pool?
That's the merit,
So
the
why
merit
wouldn't
pool.
that be in personal services then?
The way
It's distributed
it's distributed once raises are
across,
approved
because it's
through the
not
year.
uniform.
Okay.
So we don't put that budget authority to the individual departments until after raises are done, and then it's distributed in the department. Thank you, guys, I'm sorry.
Well, I don't want to pick on Parks and Rec, but they have merit increases already in their personal services.
Well, that line, Brian, you want to talk or?
No, that's
That
fine.
line refers to, so when you're looking at comparing last year to this year, people got merit increases for this year. So then you have that increase in there for the same exact employees. It's just saying that when we budgeted for the 16 budget, then there wasn't the merit pool in there because it was budgeted in a lump. But now you see their Department 16 budget has it in there because it's been allocated out. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm explaining it very well.
Well, just
But
as long
that's
as
to
that
recognize-
department isn't handling merit increases
No,
differently than other
that's just the
departments.
note that says that recognizes the 16 increase that was not in there when we budgeted for 16. And then the 17, it's not talking about that.
Speaking of, while we're on Parks and Rec, on page, I think it's 64, we look at the golf course numbers.
As we talked about fee increases, did we see any fee increase for Eagle Bend this year?
We already had it.
The,
We did.
We do.
Yeah.
Are you talking about for 2017?
correct. Yeah, in the budget.
We did not budget any fee increases. We will adjust them as we see revenue as we end the year.
Because
We kind of see where we are with revenue.
Where I'm going with that is with all the talk of the redevelopment in Albemarle, it's very likely in the not so distant future that Eagle Bend becomes the only public golf course, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah, at that point, I got to think the demand is going to increase. I would hope the demand would increase, and I would wonder if that would be an appropriate time to begin looking at fee changes, particularly for more peak times. Particularly when you look at the ending, the budget of the golf course over the last couple of years, which is, it's not been good in
Right.
terms of its ability to generate.
Yep. Yeah, I think the biggest impact we're seeing from the Albemarle switch is the tournament play. There's a lot of tournaments trying to come to us. So our ability to handle that tournament traffic is probably one of our bigger challenges. But, you know, that's an opportunity to grow, so we're pretty excited about it.
Tom, did we get the director salary out of the golf course fund into the general fund? Okay, good. One thing that I noticed.
We eliminated the position.
Oh, okay, so it was that position then.
Took care of
Okay.
that.
One thing that I liked with last year's budget book is that it had, it spelled out on each department exactly where the funds were coming from for salaries. That was really useful. That's one thing I was missing here.
I think I would make a comment that we had a lot of changes that we were trying to make, and we didn't get them all done
Yeah.
for this recommended budget.
Yeah.
I think the budget team is very committed to what your final adopted budget product looking like is gonna be, I'm gonna say, has a lot more words in it than what you're seeing right here. This is very much, it took us a long time to get the numbers to come out of the system on these pages. And now, once we get to our adopted, we'll spend some time really explaining it all, which I know is a little bit backwards than you all are used to seeing it. But hopefully that work will then pay off next year when we kind of have it all done and it
Yeah.
becomes part of our new way of doing it.
Excellent.
Unless we change it all again.
So the golf course fund now is a very clear picture of actually what its revenue and expenditure wise for the actual golf course. We got it banged out now.
Pretty much.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure that was.
Clear as can be.
Yeah, you know, the golf. Sorry. The golf course is one of those funds similar to water and sewer that are so, you know, if it's wet, you're not going to have revenue, as much revenue. And it's just one of those funds that's very difficult to project. You know, water and sewer is obviously a lot bigger operation, but when you're talking about that, honestly, comparison, it's not a large amount of money. And so I think they've done a real good job out there of just cutting back on the expenditures as they see the revenues not coming in when the weather doesn't support it. But
Are we getting a year, you wrote it up, or
Just a comment.
we didn't want to budget more revenue or budget more expenditures? It was just.
I don't know that we need to do it right now, but I would like to take a look at as it becomes the only public course, considering peak times to be of value.
The reason I ask is it may take a rate increase to generate this amount of revenue based on what I think Brian's saying, that yeah, the demand may go up, but it rains every day, then we may have to raise it just for that. So I think numbers wise, and if we get additional revenue from any fee increase that we will do, we can always come back and amend the budget, which is something else we haven't really talked about with you all as a procedure. But we do have a process. If we have revenue that is unexpected and we need additional budget authority to spend that unexpected revenue, we can come back. I mean, have done that over the years at some point to amend the budget.
Yeah.
And I think Brian is thinking that we're going to get into more regular cycle of doing that to catch up with what's happening, since we're adopting the budget now that will be in effect for 18 months basically.
right, and I've seen this other cities that have been at. When we get to the point where we're budgeting so many new funds, we're trying to be as transparent as possible. So what happens sometimes is, well, we start estimating our 16, we just start changing things in mid-year. 16 revised budget might go up, some revenues come in, and so many cities have a practice of they just do a revised current year budget every year, just as part of a practice, because then it fits and sets up the next fiscal year budget. So that might be something we start seeing here, is just, hey, at mid-year, we're looking at everything. If we want to revise our 17 budget in the middle of 2017, we have that mechanism to do it. So.
With the longevity payments, one thing that I can understand the 4% and the 2%, but I am concerned about new people not getting it at all, phasing it out. I don't want to phase it out. I can understand the percentage being changed, but I don't think that's really fair. What do you think about that as a compromise?
Compromise
To not having it all, or having 4%?
I'd probably look at just about anything, but,
I'd like to get the numbers on that, continuing the program at least, even though it may only be 2% this year.
2% of what?
Instead of 4. Well, you were looking at 4, weren't you? And you lowered it to 2, or did you lower it
No,
to
it's
$2?
$48 per year after 5 years versus 40 years is recommended, or $40 versus $40 a year for time
It's not
worked.
percentage-based.
So what?
Was the merit increase then was the 2?
Yeah, merit
I'm
is-
confusing the 2 then.
Yes. Don't-
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So we went with 2% for the merit increase?
Sure, which has a general fund impact of 400,000.
Okay, but the longevity
The
program?
longevity has a general fund impact of,
I think
57,000.
it's in the 50s.
Got it.
Well, the total is bigger than that.
It's
It's 87,000, almost
87,000. It's like,
90,000.
yeah, 90,000 bucks, 87,000 bucks, but
40
the
and
general
40.
fund, the impact was 57,000.
Of the reduction.
Right.
That's the reduction, not the impact of the
The
program.
cost of the
Right.
program.
Thank you, I got it.
Yeah.
Okay. What other things you guys have?
One last thing, this seems like pennies, but page 13, reduce bioscience technology business center incentive fund request from $75,000 to $25,000. I guess I just had two quick questions on that. First of all, what's the primary function of that incentive fund? And secondly, as we look to nearly zero the thing out, I mean, relative speaking to what they ask for, do we get it to the point where it doesn't actually have any benefit and is just $25,000 being thrown out the door?
Yeah, it's a brand new initiative, first off. And so they asked for 75 from the county, 75 from the city. My suspicion is that the county will step up to the 75. Because of other cuts, we cut it back from 75.
And what does that use? I mean,
So what it's used for is to help build out, okay, as an incentive for a business either on campus or in the West Park that we have property, and they would help with the build out to attract somebody. My impression is Laverne didn't have any problem and completely understood the 25. I think it will get used, and in discussions I'm having with them, I think you're going to see some occupancy growth there shortly. So I don't think it's meaningless, but I think he wanted funds on hand to use in that kind of incentivization. And quite frankly, you know, we're spreading around a lot of money in terms of those types of things anyway. So, and I think we've been pretty good partners with them. They have a basement project that potentially will cost a significant amount of money. These are projects to help a little bit of build out, mainly in the west. I think mainly in the west facility that they operate. So I don't think it's meaningless, but it just isn't as much as they want. And maybe they wouldn't have spent it year 1, year 2, or year 3, and maybe we give them 25 a year and they get back to their 75. I think he just wanted a pot of money. I think he wanted to maybe get it all at the same time.
I think everybody wants a pot of money. I'm just making sure this pot has a purpose.
Everybody wants a pot of money.
Any other questions right now? Okay, well, I would like to tell members of the public that have come here this afternoon that next week, this item will be on the agenda to publish our recommendation on what the recommended expenditure level will be. Recommended right now is 189 million. I can't remember the exact figure that's in front of me. Turned too many pages. But that'll be the item that'll be before us next week. Once that is established, and I encourage, you know, anybody who would like to come, you know, give comment, that will be one of the times to do it. There is a public comment section tonight, if you all would like to talk tonight. But here again, it's not for consideration this evening by any means, but next week will be one of the times. After that, there are additional dates, and again, what were the dates? In August 2nd is the public hearing, the required public hearing for the budget. At that point, we will consider those will be the levels of expenditure that happen, so everybody understands, okay? And again, that will be a public comment session, so just so that everybody understands, okay? That's where we're at.
Does that mean I have to keep quiet today?
No, ma'am?
We'll start the meeting at 5:45.
Yeah, right.
Public comments probably going to be 10 minutes into that meeting. So.
Right. Okay. Anything else?
Thanks.
Tom, again, thank you. Brian, Diane, Casey, Brandon, everybody else involved. A lot of work.
Danielle.
Thank Danielle. But anyway, thank you all. We'll see you real soon.